within the horror genre, for the different conventions, I have used a variety of different elements to bring out what is typically seen in the horror genre. For example, for the sound, for the introduction, I've used an establishing shot with the sound of the crows in the background. This is, as you may well know, it's a cliche what is of what is present in a horror movie, representing death, abandonment, and linked in with this, as I mentioned, the establishing shot shows the location fitting right into the era that I'm using for my horror movie, so the Victorian era, full of lots of change, and at a time where witches and supernatural things was very common. And for the location, I've used different elements to add darker light, and in conjunction with the music, it's created a more of a horror convention. Also, one of the key props that I've used is a candle, and I've used it to represent the horror genre, but also challenge the horror genre. So I've used it to represent the horror genre, as candles are associated with witches and supernatural beings, showing a clear link to our antagonist, who can be seen as a witch, I'd say, but also on the other hand, challenging the conventions, representing light and hope, like the flickering at the end of a tunnel. Used our antagonist Ethel, her clothing, to represent, to challenge the convention. So of her, even though the majority of her clothing is dark, there's certain elements that is like light. So her skirt is white, which can represent the fact that she has redeemable, pure qualities. But also, I've used lighting to create a dark and gloomy atmosphere within the movie overall. And one of the main things is the makeup that I've used. So for the dolls within my movie, I've used light and not that much amount of makeup, which goes against challenging my antagonist's personality, as you would expect it to be heavy and dark. But I use this as kind of a juxtaposition between the light makeup and the dark situation. The main target audience that we are aiming for is young adults and older teenagers, purely due to the content, because the content could be traumatizing for any younger age group, but also the fact that due to some like research that I've followed through, on movies that have a similar narrative, for example The Conjuring and Insidious, I feel that our most common audience will be young women and girls who will be able to relate to the vulnerability that our actresses will go through in cliches of horror, and the stereotype of the damsel in distress character, and how in society they're expected to behave a certain way. But I also feel that we'll have a particular fan base because of the genre of the film, which is it's a psychological horror, which therefore extends the fan base for more than girls. So again, I feel it's going to be young adults and more of teenagers who are more likely to go see the movie because they were able to relate to the different situations, but also as my research showed, teenagers are more daring to go to see a movie because they feel they want to live up to the challenge The main social group that I feel my movie represents is the Victorian era, and this is through we recreated the etiquette that they have, so the mannerisms. So, for example, our antagonist Ethel, even though she's in a state of losing her mind, she's still elegant and graceful, which shows that it was a social norm in that day, and we recreated that. But also the morals of that day, where ladies are expected to behave. It's a patriarchal, very patriarchal situation, and we've explored this with Ethel capturing the girls due to them having the wrong morals, acting out of character. I feel this will have a huge impact on the audience, because to an extent they'll be able to relate how girls are expected to act, but also they'll be intrigued by the way to the how big the extent of the seriousness of the situation. Another point is at the time of the era, maintaining it linked in with the etiquette, maintaining the fashion. So the fashion at the time was wearing unshapely, long clothing that covers you up, with rich colours which are associated with being upper class and well off, but also linked with floral patterns which represent femininity and the purity and the childlike that they have. The sound that I used is also linked to the era. I've used sounds from children's toys that they would have at the time, so Jack in the Boxes, dolls, instead of using something that would not fit at all with the genre, something electric pop or something. But a further social group that I feel I represent in this movie, that I've represented in this movie, is the upper class, which you can see from their mannerisms and the clothes, as I've mentioned before. One of the main attractions for a female audience, as I have mentioned before, is the gender of the actresses. It's significant as they can relate to the vulnerability of the girls and their situation and how they can be taken advantage of. And even though it is at Victorian times, it still applies to society today. Also because Ethel is the villain, but she's female, therefore she being a femme fatale, who is strong and capable, which can be a source of enlightening to our audience. The psychological thriller represents supernatural psychological problems, which I feel will attract a horror fan base constantly with the horror blockbusters. I feel another significant attraction is the name, The Human Dolls, which I believe will ultimately bring in a teenage fan base. From research that I've done beforehand, I've had a shocking reaction to the name, where they're really intrigued and confused and they want to know more. In my opinion, I think the Warner Brothers could act as a producer and as a distributor to my film. This company is quite famous for producing and distributing blockbusters, and I feel my opening scene has the ability to be a blockbuster due to the storyline, which is similar to ones which have been distributed and produced by this company. An example being The Conjuring and Annabelle, which have all been very successful in cinemas. The narrative I've used is quite creative, and even though it may use genres that are common, it's very unique. It is a very unique idea, and I believe that will attract an immense audience. Also, however, a smaller film company that I believe could produce and distribute my film is Film 4. Although it is not as well known, its values represent the underrepresented, and within the filming industry, the female proportion is underrepresented. So I feel like they will have an immediate liking to our movie, as the antagonist is a leading female character. Another reason is another value that they have is to represent new British talent. For example, from research I've done, for examples being Emma Stone or Emma Roberts. And with my movie, I feel like instead of using older actors to play teenagers, I would rather like to use younger actors with experience, but to an extent. And I feel this will also bring in a new kind of audience for my movie. I feel that Film 4, with advertising on their main channel, will expose it to a wider audience, with the cross-media convergence of advertising my film on the main channel 4 at the certain times when they know that teenage viewers will be looking and watching the channel. Warner Brothers, as they're very experienced with blockbusters, may distribute my film through the use of social media, with posters, as they know that my common target audience are constantly on social media sites. Looking back, I believe that I've acquired immense number of skills in different areas, particularly in the editing section. I had a limited amount of knowledge with editing, and I was quite distant and not very confident in approaching editing. But with the genre of the movie, I've gained skills of using the different tools that the software, which is called Premiere Pro, is used. So different elements to help zoom, change the lighting. Also through constant specific features such as uploading the music and changing the sounds to make it louder, for example. Secondly, I feel I've made a lot of progress in filming techniques, such as the camera angles and the framing. I've learnt how important a certain angle can be. For example, if you're shooting a low angle shot from a worm's eye view of the character, it connotates to the audience that this character is significant, dominant and powerful. Details like this is what made the improvements from my preliminary work to my current media product. Arranging what the audience can visually see within the scene. With my preliminary task, I had little knowledge of what aspects in the movie is needed to control, how well the film into the genre. However, with more knowledge and research that I've gained with my product, I have matched elements that are typically needed for a horror movie, ensuring the right aspects are present to not only fit into a more intense amount of knowledge, but concerning the micro elements such as the camera angles with their meanings, the editing techniques, and product design with the mise en scène. I also became more skilled with the software I use, the equipment with the filming and the preparation, using the editing software that I mentioned before, the Premiere Pro, learning every aspect of the software with the sound controls, the visual controls, and the editing overall. From the process of construction, constructing this product, I have learned that technology is a significant part of filmmaking process, and a large amount of complicated equipment is needed for each individual thing. I've also learned that a slight change in the technology, for example, a change in the camera angle, can have a significant effect on the quality of the picture and the sound and how it all comes together in the end. I've also learned that with the technology, a piece of equipment can be used for a number of things with a simple button, causing quick changes that are necessary. Furthermore, I also learned how to combine different pieces of media put together for my movie, the music website, and then downloading and cutting and combining with the opening. But overall, I feel I have a wider knowledge of the equipment that is necessary. For example, I use 3 different types of camera: one for photography, a smaller camera, which is called a DV camera, and a larger, much more complicated camera, a Sony Canon, with professional elements such as the colour different changes and the sharper sound that it can pick up. With these cameras, I also began to use other equipment that comes along with it, a dolly, which is a type of tripod that can help with a tracking shot, and a tripod to hold the camera and change the angles to help with the panning and establishing shot. Therefore, I feel I've gained a large amount of knowledge since my preliminary task.